Let them think they're winning. Jerry don't know us Brits. You put our backs to the wall, we'll fight tooth and nail, to the death.
This city, Amiens, it isn't far from the old Somme battlefield. A field where every yard is soaked in British blood. The men don't forget that. It's do or die this time.
Everybody knows it. The French, the Canadians,
Australians, New Zealanders,
the Indian troops, all of our allies. But for now, we stand alone with our backs to the walls against Jerry's elite.
Salutations, Stormtroopers! Automatic here for Automatic Games, bringing you yet another installment in my Battlefield 1 series. This episode entitled Amiens.
We need to defend the city of Amiens at all costs. Hold on to Point Labyrinth in the ruins over here. If we lose this position, we must fall back to this bridge, Pont Neuf, and keep it secure. Should we fail to stop the advance here, we shall make our last stand at Place Longueville.
I want to preface this video by saying that the battle for Amiens never took place. The Kaiserschlacht fell short of this city, so this engagement is very speculative, and I want to discuss why exactly the wheels came off of the German offensive, and I would chalk that up to numerous reasons. For instance, I would say logistics, discipline, and a certain vague sense as to the direction of the units involved. Now, what I mean by that is, okay, well, when Ludendorff devised Operation Michael, he wanted to leave his options open. I know we discussed that in the last episode, St. Quentin Scar. And certainly this was a departure from previous strategies. And it could have its advantages, but in my humble opinion, I think it had some disadvantages as well. Now, Field Marshal Douglas Haig believed, and he's the British commander, he believed that the intent was to seize port cities along the English Channel. And that very well may have been the case, but it wasn't explicitly stated in the orders. I want to share with you the orders that came down from Kaiser Wilhelm II, and so yeah, I'll do that. I hope you pardon my accent. I'm going to start to implement accents when I quote articles or people. But so here we go.
Main headquarters, 10 March 1918. By His Majesty's orders, the Michael attack will take place on 21st March. The first attack on the enemy lines is fixed for 9:40 a.m. The first great tactical objective of Crown Prince Ruprecht's army group is to cut off the English at the Cambrai salient and reach the line at Croix-Sils-Bapaume-Peronne. If the attack of the right wing proceeds favorably, this army is to press on beyond Croix-Sils. The further task of this army group is to push forward in the general direction of Arras-Albert. Keep its left wing on the Somme at Peronne, and intensifying its pressure on the right wing, compel the retirement of the English front facing the Sixth Army also, and release further German troops from trench warfare for the general advance. The German Crown Prince's army group will first gain the line at the Somme south of the Armagnon stream and the Crozat Canal. By pushing on rapidly, the 18th Army is to secure the crossing of the Somme and the canal.
So as far as specifics are concerned, it talks about cutting off the British Army. Specifically what they're referring to there is the main units engaged in Operation Michael would be the 3rd and 5th Army, British armies. They wanted to cut them off from the French 6th Army, thereby separating the nationalities, if you will. They also mentioned securing a crossing on the Somme, a couple crossings on the Somme. They also mentioned the entire notion of freeing up additional German soldiers from trench warfare. Otherwise, they don't really say what the end game is. There's no mention of ports along the English Channel and there's no mention of Amiens. Now, of course, this was intentional on Ludendorff's part, wanting to keep his options open. And it wasn't until sometime into the offensive that he realized that Amiens, an important railway junction, was a good-looking target. But I feel the idea that they omitted that from the general orders, I think that was an oversight. But then again, one might disagree, saying, well, how would he know? Because he was trying to follow up successes, and he may not have known that he was going to see successes in this specific operation. After all, the Kaiserschlatt, it consisted of several operations like Michael. I mean, there was Mars, there was Georgette, etc. So, you know, this was just the opening phase. But yeah, that's why I say that I think that vague aspect to the plans was kind of you know, a setback, if you will. But nonetheless, I mean, Operation Michael sparked off with St. Quentin quite well.
We are losing objective.
These other operations were smaller than, certainly subsidiary to, Operation Michael, and some were contingent upon the success of Michael and canceled as a result of the setbacks encountered.
We have lost objective.
Now, I mentioned logistics. Of course, that entails, you know, ammunition, general supply, food. And in the St. Quentin Scar episode, we discussed the food shortages in Germany, which was leading to civil unrest, I might add. Now, you have to take into account that the British Navy has blockaded German ports. As far as land trade is concerned, overland trade, Germany, Austria-Hungary is pretty much surrounded by rival nations. So you don't have overland trade either. Everything you produce is going to have to be domestically produced. And so certainly on the home front, people are feeling the impact of that, and that even extends to the soldier in the field. The German soldier is typically known by this point in the war as being undernourished, undersupplied. You know, in fact, it makes me think of I have this quote on hand, BEF Times edition. This is a publication that's given to the average British soldier. It's the January 1918 edition, and at some point in one of their editorials, they say, quote, "It is still our firm opinion that any Hun could be bought for a tin of bully and a slice of bread," end quote. And that's kind of speaks to the reputation that the German soldier carried with him at this point. As being, you know, under-resourced. And what, you know, what's interesting is, in terms of discipline, when they left the bad territory, and I guess I should talk on that for a moment. Remember how Ludendorff, when he takes command, he decides, you know, our trenches are in disarray, so let's pull back and develop the Siegfried Line, the Hindenburg Line. And in some cases, he pulled his men back 20 miles, employing scorched earth. Where he didn't employ scorched earth was the Somme battlefield, just a crater-ridden wasteland. Horrible territory for the Allies to move up and occupy. Well, now, of course, Ludendorff's men are on the offensive, crossing the same territory, and it's just not easy land for supply lines to traverse. Not to mention that, by their very nature, the stormtroopers are moving at a quick pace and are carrying very little resources on them. So all of that just combines into a dire situation when it comes to supply. In fact, listening to Blueprint for Armageddon, Dan Carlin's podcast, he mentions a story about a German staff officer that drives into a village, and he sees a lieutenant just kind of loitering there without any of his troops around him, and he says, you know, you and your troops need to be marching. Where are your men? And lieutenant says, I can't control them. And in fact, his men were running around chasing chickens and livestock. They were looting houses just because they had this desire, I mean, this need for nourishment and for, well, frankly, I mean, some of them were just stealing clothes and stuff, but you get the idea. A lot of looting going on, and that certainly helped slow down the offensive. Now, it's interesting to listen to Ludendorff's reminiscences on these opening phases of the Kaiserschlacht. He barely even mentions Amiens. Meanwhile, if you read von Hindenburg's recollections on the matter, he's very poignant. He gets more to the point. He does mention Amiens. I quote,
"The hopes and wishes which had soared beyond Amiens had to be recalled. Facts must be treated as facts. Human achievements are never more than patchwork. Favorable opportunities had been neglected or had not always been exploited with the same energy, even where a splendid goal was beckoning. We ought to have shouted into the ear of every single man, 'Press on to Amiens. Put in your last ounce. Perhaps Amiens means decisive victory. Capture Villers-Bretonneux whatever happens, so that from its heights we can command Amiens with masses of our heavy artillery.' It was in vain. Our strength was exhausted. The enemy fully realized what the loss of Villers-Bretonneux would mean to him. He threw against our advancing columns all the troops he could lay hands on. The French appeared, and with their massed attacks and skillful artillery saved the situation for the Allies and themselves. Thus, human nature was urgently voicing its claims. We had to take breath. The infantry needed rest, and the artillery ammunition."
End quote. So yeah, they needed rest and ammunition. He was talking about taking a city other than Amiens, a city with a commanding height over Amiens. That city being, or rather, that village being Villers-Bretonneux. The suggestion is that you put your heavy artillery up there with a commanding view of Amiens, and it's over. While there wouldn't be probably street fighting like you see in this video, that would kind of be a hostage taker's position, and Amiens would be theirs at that point. He even goes so far as to say, you know, it should have been whispered into the ear of every man that, you know, we're driving toward Amiens. But of course that didn't occur, and meanwhile you had groups splitting off to attack Arras, or, you know, looting little hamlets along the way, or whatever, when clearly his suggestion was they should have concentrated forces and spurred on forces without any of this hesitation or looting, and moved toward Amiens. Because that would have been a devastating blow to the Allies. But as it turns out, the way they were kind of, you know, letting things develop and reacting to opportunities, by the time the Central Powers realized, hey, we could take this important railway junction, the Allies realized, hey, they might take that important railway junction. So therefore the Allies kind of had time to react, and as days wore on, there were rear guard actions against the advancing stormtroopers. You know, the British did turn and fight on several occasions. In fact, virtually every day. And by the 5th of April, the gig was up, though. Ludendorff called off Operation Michael on that date. And so it was over. The Germans took about, well, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is almost 250,000 casualties. Slightly less than what the Allies took. The French and British, they had problems reinforcing each other. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the Field Marshal was Sir Douglas Haig. as far as the British troops were concerned. As far as the French troops were concerned, it was Pétain. What was his first name? Philippe Pétain. And so there was a reluctance to reinforce each other. It was apparent, because of Operation Michael, that they needed one person in charge of the Allied forces. And as it came to pass, they pretty much appointed Ferdinand Foch in charge. They called him, he ended up being Supreme Commander of the Allied forces. They called him a Generalissimo. But his appointment into that position was a result of Operation Michael and the lack of coordination. Part of the intent was to drive a wedge between British and French forces, for the Germans to get in there between the 3rd and 5th armies, British, and the 6th Army, French. As it turned out, what they had done was let the Allies revise their command structure, and so, at least on a metaphorical sense, no wedge would be driven in the future. Also, the 100 Days Offensive was right on the heels of the Kaiserschlacht. And that 100 Days Offensive, that's the last 100 days. I mean, that sealed the fate of Germany. The other nations, I mean, the other Central Powers would capitulate before Germany. Austria-Hungary, I mean, that's a whole nother story, to be honest, and we will get to some battles where Austria is involved, so I'll talk on that, but they were a constant letdown to Germany. They really were, but yeah, that's a story for another video. And so, no great battle in Amiens, no street fighting like this. In fact, street fighting like this, it didn't really occur during the Great War. It's more of a World War II kind of thing. I mean, it makes for an interesting level, though. I'll admit that. But Battlefield 1 does tend to, it suspends historical fact occasionally, but there's still a lot they got right.
50 attackers remain.
For all the crap I give them, I mean, it's still a solid game. I'll be the first to admit that. But yeah, that is how the wheels came off, my friends. And when the Allies concentrated forces, it ended up being even more devastating to the Germans that were advancing piecemeal by this point. To aid in illustrating that point, I'd like to share one more quotation with you, this one from a British officer, Major Richard Foote, D Battery, 310th Brigade Royal Field Artillery. And I quote,
"As the sky began to lighten on the dawn of 26 March, we were as ready for them as if we had been preparing to practice shooting on Salisbury Plain. What a day that was. I could watch the German columns approaching one of my registered targets, and time the salvos of my own, and other batteries too, to arrive there with them. The smother of shellfire would disperse them. Watching them reorganize, I could do the same to another column elsewhere, then switch back to the first and break it up a second time. All day long they came on, and all day long we shifted our fire from one point to another across those valleys. They had plenty of other well-aimed opposition too. In fact, Baquet became the new bastion of the British line, which was never lost."
End quote. Here we are just 5 days out from kicking off Operation Michael, and already Major Foote is having a field day with the exhausted German columns. Now, some might try to paint Operation Michael in a positive light. Lord knows General Ludendorff did in his memoirs. They did manage to take 40 miles of land, but some of that territory was ceded to the Allies when General Ludendorff pulled back from his original trench line to create the Siegfried Line. And that territory specifically was not very good land. Otherwise, the German casualties incurred, the vast majority of them were, in fact, the best of the best, the stormtroopers, plucked from units army-wide. And so what that left was divisions, regiments, units with second-tier soldiers who had lost their strongest compatriots. Now, as far as the land that they actually got, none of it was of real important strategic value. In fact, the strategic bastions still remained in the hands of the Allies. That included Arras and Amiens. So, I guess that brings us to the end of this video. If you're interested in World War I, above and beyond watching my Battlefield 1 videos, then I urge you to read. And I want to share with you a quote from Kaiser Wilhelm II once he heard. End quote. As you can tell, he wasn't very happy, and he was a little childish about the whole affair. No, that was my son. But yeah, if you are interested in World War I above and beyond my videos, and you do end up looking stuff up, you know, when you look online, look for first-hand accounts. Those are the best. I mean, you never really want to suffer a historian spin. You know, don't take my word on everything you hear. Lord knows I'm bound to get something wrong. I'm bound to get a lot of things wrong. But I try, and I attempt to verify. Anyhow, going back to the Germans, yeah, if you were to call that a victory, if anything, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. One of those victories you couldn't have two of for fear of losing the war. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. If you did like it, I'm Automatic for Automatic Games. I appreciate you watching, and I'll talk to you soon, friends.